From all corners of the globe to your ears, it's the Midnight Movie Cowboys. Sometimes informative, sometimes controversial, but always unpredictable. It's the Midnight Movie Cowboys podcast with your hosts, Hunter, John, and Stu. And now, on with the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Midnight Movie Cowboys. I'm Hunter, and with me is John. Say hello, John.
Hello.
And before we get into our topic this week, do you have any junk you want to whip out, John?
Let me see here. Let's see what I got. I'll try to find things that aren't controversial.
I'll go ahead and do mine while you get yours together.
You go ahead and do that.
I just have one shining jewel here that I want to recommend to all of our listeners because it features a friend of the show, Death Wish 4K from Kino Lorber.
Yeah.
Featuring friend of the show, Paul Talbot on the commentary.
Paul Talbot, all gangster and everything. Yo.
Yeah, like as Mike Malloy put it, he has harpooned his white whale. You know, it's a big deal. Congrats to Paul for getting to do a Death Wish commentary. We know he's done a million of these for Bronson movies, but he's never done one for freaking Death Wish.
It's sad. I know. I'm crying tears of joy because we brought him into the podcast world.
That's right.
10 years ago?
That was, it was forever ago. I don't even know.
That was his first podcast ever. He wasn't even doing commentaries then.
Yeah. We set him off to bigger things. But that's all I got.
Is that it for you?
I wanted to tell our listeners to check it out.
Well, yeah, definitely. It's the highest possible recommendation we can give, especially if you like that film. I don't think there's anybody watching or listening to us that has not seen Death Wish, but it's not my favorite Bronson movie, but it's pretty good. I mean, it's kind of essential. You have to watch it whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I got, I got a Max Allan Collins book of all things, Quarry's X, which Eric Zaldivar, friend of the show and sometimes co-host, he told me about it, that in it is a satire of a actor who is probably very blatantly Robert Conrad. And he's got him as a closet homosexual who's just working on a movie set or something like that. I haven't read it yet, but it sounds pretty interesting. So it sounded funny. Like Eric said, it was hysterical. I don't think it was based on any real incident between Max Allan Collins and any actor, because I don't think he'd worked on movies in the 70s, but I might be wrong on that. But it's one of those hard case crime editions, has a nice cover, looks like a retro 50s paperback. You know how it goes. Tarzan Omnibus, you can tell I hit second in Charles because this got traded in. This is a collection of all the Dark Horse Tarzan Limited series of the 90s. Most of them I missed out on because I just wasn't buying comic books then. I was a newspaper reporter, very serious with my life. And if you were seen with a comic book and you were a grown man, you'd be shunned. They sew a letter on your clothing, geek or something like that. I don't know.
What do you watch? Paw Patrol? Do you watch Paw Patrol?
Oh my God, man, why you got to get on me for not liking the woke? This is something I found called George Washington's First War. It's all about his battles and such. My ancestor George Grace died at the Battle of Brandywine, so I'm kind of got this to kind of maybe get a feel for what's going on and what happened in George Washington's early life that made him combat ready and ready to be our first president, probably still our best president because he went back to normal life after leaving this crap. And then I found an interesting Tarzan thing called the Unauthorized Tarzan. Apparently in the 60s, Charlton Publications, who gave us some pretty cool Steve Ditko comics in the 60s, they published an unauthorized Tarzan comic because Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated sent him a cease and desist probably after about a year because I think only Gold Key had the legit rights to Tarzan. And so they put it out. It's a different style. There was a respected artist, Joe Gill, did the artwork for it, but it looks pretty cool. It looks like he did like literal adaptations from the early books. So looking forward to digging into some comic book reading. I've been doing so much serious reading, it's kind of eating my brain. Also, I got I'm a big fan of Pearls Before Swine, so I got this is one of their books. I'm only in this for me, so it's probably my favorite humor strip in the newspapers. Garfield would be a very, very distant second, I think. And then Family Circus would be third. So there you go.
Very good. Very good. Well, speaking of cartoons, this week we are talking about anime. But hold on.
Yeah.
I said, John, let's talk about Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. Let's talk about a good Miyazaki film. Let's talk about, one his great epic fantasy film. It's basically Dune, but we don't talk about that. But as we were talking, you said I'm gonna watch Warriors of the Wind, the New World Entertainment version of it when it came to America. And I was going, New World did a cool anime. They did a thing with an anime called Angel's Egg, and they called it In the Aftermath, which was a much more drastic import job. But we went, let's, instead of just focusing on Nausicaa, we can talk about that and talk about Warriors of the Wind, but let's look at the New World anime. Let's look at kind of these two examples of weird kind of altered versions of anime that come over. And I remember, I was not around for Warriors of the Wind or any of that stuff in the 80s. I was around for stuff like Power Rangers, where they brought over Super Sentai and would reshoot stuff with American actors to make it an American show. I had no clue when I was a kid that was a Japanese show. I did recognize that. Oh, it's kind of reminds me of a Godzilla movie a little bit. Like I did have that vibe, but I didn't connect the dots and go, this is a Japanese show that's been repurposed. But a show that I was very aware was Japanese was Dragon Ball Z, which was hugely popular when I was an late middle school, early teenage, college, high school years. I mean, that show was massive, but I was very aware of how it was changed because a lot of people talked about it because the music was different, the voice acting was different, and it, some of the stuff was censored. I remember reading stuff in the newspaper about how parents would buy the manga for their kids and would be shocked that you see Goku's penis, So there's a lot of conversation around how these versions are different. But a lot of anime fans, they're really mad. They want nothing but the pure product from Japan, with subtitles. They don't want anything else. But like I was watching In the Aftermath Blu-ray, there was a guy on there talking about Angel's Egg, and he brought up Warriors of the Wind, and he goes, when I was a kid, he goes, anime fans talk about this film like it's some great crime, but I'm quite fond of it. When I was a kid, that's how I watched it, and I didn't even know there was another version. And same with In the Aftermath. He goes, I just had no clue. Were you aware of these movies? How were they kind of viewed back then?
Warriors of the Wind. My brother, we went to a video store on 99-cent day, and everybody in the family rented their personal choice because I think he got to keep them for 3 days or a week or something. It was a crazy way for a store to rent out its library selection. The back stuff, the old movies, and my brother picked Warriors of the Wind, and I could tell it was a Japanese anime just from the box, but just that anime style. But I only watched like maybe 10 or 20 minutes of it, but I think I had picked up, there was a real big launch of manga back in the mid 80s by different comic book companies, Lone Wolf and Cub and Kamui and Area 88. And I was really into like Asian pop culture stuff, simply from the Kung Fu films and the Godzilla movies and the superhero stuff in the 70s, like Ultraman and all that. And I bought all those comic books, and I bought the first issue of a comic called Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. And they had the whole essay, and I think they said it was cut by Roger Corman, turned into Warriors of the Wind. So I kind of knew that, okay, when these things come over here, because there is no real adult commercial market for Japanese cartoons, which we called Japanimation back then.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it's like there was no realistic market, so they would cut them down for children to watch. market them as children's videos. So I did watch some of Warriors of the Wind. I said, this actually looks pretty interesting. It's more interesting than this. I didn't watch cartoons anymore because I was like 13 or 14. I'm like too old for this crap, you know. Back then, my generation, Gen X, early Gen X was we were pushed very quickly to grow up. Like you needed to put away the toys, you needed to donate them, and you know, no cartoons, stop watching. You're allowed to watch Bugs Bunny, and that's about it, you know. And I remember really digging it, what I saw, but I didn't watch the whole thing. And then years later, a very popular item in the late 90s was a fan sub edition of Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. And I think I watched that. And then, of course, in recent years, you could watch the Miyazaki stuff anywhere, but it was a very different market in the 80s. Like, people forget, My Neighbor Totoro, I think Troma was the first company to release it over here. And the reviews in like the various critic circles was like, oh, the Japanese and their juvenile cartoons. And it's like, you know, because Disney was considered king of animation no matter what. It's like every Disney movie was promoted as a classic, thus it was a classic. Critics probably didn't even sit through them and just said, oh, it's another Disney classic here, it's wonderful. And I just thought, oh, this is childish garbage, and who the hell over the age of 8 would even watch his stuff? Because I outgrew Disney cartoons when I was young. Like, I think Fox and the Hound was the one I didn't go see, and I just didn't care. And you know,
I don't think anybody cared about Fox and the Hound.
Yeah, I it's funny because I found it on DVD the other day at a library sale, and I said, well, okay, I don't think Kato has seen this. My son has seen it, so it's like I'll just grab it just for the Disney shelf, but I don't even know if it's any good.
I remember being a kid and thinking it was disappointing, you know.
Disappointing, yeah,
but
not enough of those Broadway musical numbers.
No, but you know, it's based on the source material. It's based on is extremely dark, and I think I was familiar with the story, and I was going, "How did Disney make a film out of this?" And then watching it and going, it just seemed like they didn't know where to go with it or what to do with it. And that film was made during a very troubled period at Disney Animation. You know, that's around when they were doing stuff like Black Cauldron, and you know, that was when like
Kirby Goes Bananas.
That's when Don Bluth like basically took half the animation department with him. Like, he was heading up, and then he split with the most talented people. So, you know, that was not a great time. I think, you know, people like Tim Burton worked on Fox and the Hound, you know, like it had a lot of
because I think they were grabbing any animator they could. So you get Tim Burton, you know. The thing is, in recent years I watched The Great Mouse Detective, which I'd never seen. And even though when I was a little kid, I read some of those Basil of Baker Street books, whatever they were called. And I watched it. I thought it was pretty decent. It was fun.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I loved that one because I liked Sherlock Holmes stuff. So when I saw that one, they brought it back in theaters, and I really enjoyed watching it when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you're a Sherlock Holmes buff, which I am, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it's a blast. But Japanese cartoons, it's funny because they were treated with like such respect in Japan, and if you mention that to anybody over here, even serious film people or even serious anime buffs, they were like, oh, they were yawning in your face and all that stuff. There was a real, almost like, I hesitate to say race infused, but I think it was like in the minds of a lot of people, they're still fighting World War II. So there's or made in Japan was a slur. So it's like they didn't want to accept that Japan had made something that of quality. Because they're thinking Godzilla movies, and they're not going to bother watching a Kurosawa film or whatever. So yeah, you know, there was this kind of.
You're absolutely right, because I know, you know, I know people who specifically, like, if someone's from Japan, they're like, you know, we defeated them. Why are we talking about them? You know.
We dropped the bombs on them. Fat man, a little boy.
Like, you know, just dismissive of that, of anything from their culture. Yeah, I've definitely encountered that. You know, I'm not normally one to promote those narratives, but I've seen it firsthand, so I'm with. Like,
I experienced it in the 80s. You would get a snobbishness from American fans about anything from Japan. Godzilla movies weren't good enough because they weren't stop motion like Harryhausen. Harryhausen is the king of all special effects.
Yeah, you know
it's just like,
like, in fact, like, you know, Harryhausen, I know, looked down at the kaiju films and stuff. And now there's like a real strong fandom around that stuff. But I do remember when it was like, that's cheap trash. Like if you like
Yeah.
real monster movies, you watch Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, you watch, Mighty Joe Young or whatever, you're not watching like Godzilla. That's a guy in a suit, any idiot can do that.
Yeah, the narrative's been flipped because people started to realize that the same people that worked on the Godzilla movies worked on Kurosawa films.
Yeah.
So it's like,
yeah.
And the people that worked on the Harryhausen movies didn't really work on anything else of quality. So, and the Harryhausen movies were a lot cheaper than people realized. Like they were filmed in Malta on the cheap, and he was kind of screwed over by his producer. He didn't really give him a lot of resources, and it's just like, he's doing all these, and he didn't really. Supposedly, he wasn't as generous with the credit to his assistants or whatever. But I know that Harryhausen personally hated Godzilla because Godzilla was more popular than anything he created. It's like, well, Ray, you should have signed off for some Cyclops toys or Medusa figures or posters or something.
Harryhausen's he's probably the only auteur effects guy, where he's the auteur. It's not, nobody, it's pretty, you'd have to be only like Joe Dante can name who directed this movie,
right.
Nobody knows, nobody cares. Like I couldn't tell you who directed Clash of the Titans. I don't know.
It's I can't remember. I can't recall at all.
It's a Harryhausen film. But yeah, like you said, the actors and all that other stuff was kind of secondary. And the effects are great. Like Jason and the Argonauts, that skeleton fight is crazy.
Love it.
I don't know how you to this day. I'm like, that is so difficult to pull off.
I love Valley of the Guanji with the Allosaurus going into the church.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the coolest, and he gets the light and everything. Great. It's fantastic to look at. It's great. I really enjoy that one.
No, but and I'm not, we're not poo-pooing Harryhausen. It's just more like having a realistic vision of it. But yeah, I do remember a time where it was unfashionable to like Godzilla movies, and whereas I feel like it's kind of flipped. Like I don't know anybody younger than Gen X who's over the moon for Harryhausen, but
they don't care.
I have a lot of film students who love Godzilla movies. They love kaiju films. They like Kamen Rider. They like Ultraman. They're going to see Shin Ultraman in the theater.
Yeah,
they love that stuff. And the Harryhausen stuff, they're like, yeah, it's fine if they've heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, also because of the limitations of stop motion and how long it took to do those scenes. The thing is about the Japanese stuff, you get a more satisfying visual experience because they give you a lot of action, a lot of effects.
That's true.
And which effects it would take Harryhausen 5 years to do that on film because of the way he'd
I think too, with the Japanese stuff, you have more of a complete creative package because, on a Godzilla film, you've got Ishiro Honda, great director, trained with the best of the best as far as directing goes. You've got, Tomoyuki Tanaka, producing. You've got, Eiji Tsuburaya. Weirdly, did not know he was a convert to Catholicism. That was weird.
So now you're in the church of Tsuburaya.
Yeah, exactly. But I was like, I looked that up and I was very strange. You don't see a lot of Japanese Catholics. But you have Eiji Tsuburaya doing the special effects, and while they're not Harryhausen effects, they have a charm of their own. They're fun to look at. And you don't usually have like a guy as talented as Honda directing the actors in a Harryhausen picture. Do you think some of that, maybe I don't know because I didn't read Famous Monsters of Filmland, but were some of these narratives coming from the school of Ackerman, like maybe the Harryhausen was better and these Godzilla films aren't as good?
August Vergone told me that Ackerman didn't like Godzilla films.
Okay, so that explains it. Because that's why nobody younger than Gen X. That's why people younger than Gen X don't have any of that.
Ackerman was all about Lugosi, Karloff, 30s, 40s horror when he was young and seeing that stuff in a theater. He didn't care about Godzilla movies, Japanese films in general. He just didn't care about any of that stuff. Now, some of his contributors like Jeff Roven, I think, were big fans. Randy Palmer may have been, some of those guys. But no, Ackerman didn't give a hoot about Godzilla. Neither did the editor of Cinefantastique, Fred S. Clark. He didn't like those films either. It was, and it's because in their heads they were still fighting World War II, mentally, and never forgave him for Pearl Harbor, that sort of thing.
It's true.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's bizarre, and maybe that extended into the animation thing. I know that in the 80s, often the only way to see this stuff like subtitled, it didn't. I don't know if it actually hit the art house theaters, but it would be guys like James Hudnall would acquire tapes from Japan or Laserdisc and show them at conventions.
R.I.P.
Yeah, rest in peace. Sure.
Yeah, so the way you would have watched this was Warriors of the Wind, and the way you would have watched Nausicaa is by watching Warriors of the Wind.
Yeah,
Warriors of the Wind, it's definitely more, it kind of takes that material and it makes it more like a more simple kids adventure film, I would say. Like, it's got about a good 26 minutes stripped out of it. I think there's less nuance. It's a little more like a straight out and out adventure movie. It doesn't have the sort of meditation on nature that tends to be in Miyazaki's work.
Well, to be honest, there was no market for anything like Miyazaki in the 80s. And I think Corman knew it. They probably got this on a cheap deal. I watched a video where they talked about the guys who bought the film that became the other film we're going to talk about. And they were saying that basically when these films were shopped over here in the film markets, they would get turned down by every studio, and then Corman would just buy them for nothing, or the post-Corman New World Pictures would buy them for nothing, get some crazy cut rate deal on them just to get rid of them, just to get them over here. And those guys probably looked at it, said, well, kids aren't going to sit through stuff with this type of pacing. Probably true, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no,
this is the MTV generation. And kids now, I think, are more patient with this stuff because I think almost every kid in my son's class liked My Neighbor Totoro, like it's their favorite movie. He even had an elementary school teacher that loved it. And it's just like, I could not imagine in the 80s any child sitting through these things patiently. And kids today seem to have more of a patience for the animation. Maybe they're studying the colors, or there's an advantage to watching this stuff when you're very young. But kids in the 80s would not have put up with the kind of long stretches of Zen-like shots of the planet and, our heroes flying on their contraptions. And this kind of, that's something I realized because I watched Nausicaa. Originally, we were going to do the show 2 months ago. Let's just talk inside baseball here. Yeah. We were going to do this 2 months ago, and I watched the original Japanese version with the Disney dubbing. And then I think it was Disney that dubbed it, right? Then they do all that stuff. And then I watched the Warriors of the Wind just a couple of weeks ago. And it's funny because it's designed the way the Corman people cut it. It's more palatable to the American taste. It gets the action, the designs, all that stuff. The pacing of the original Japanese version would not have worked for anybody in the 80s. I repeat myself, but it's just true. And a lot of people don't understand that. They don't understand this is a business.
Yeah.
You're trying to get something down to the money you're going to make. In Japan, they were conditioned to watching stuff that was slow because Tezuka was big. He was worshipped like a god over there. Yeah. All the other anime geniuses or whatever you want to call them, auteurs, the audience was conditioned to watching stuff for teenagers, adults, and they would actually sit through this and have no problem with it. They respected the pacing because they just don't have an issue with that. Japanese films, I've noticed, have a different structure, different storytelling techniques. A Japanese samurai film might have all its action in the first 10 minutes and nothing for an hour. And their audiences accept this. They have no problem with that structure.
Yeah, I think with young people, too, there's also just more of a acceptance of anime, too. Like, I think they're really interested in it. It's really popular. It's more popular than it's ever been. I mean, you go to I know these are two different mediums, but if you go to Barnes and Noble, the manga section is enormous. It's, the
It's stunning.
The comic section is tiny. But whenever I go to Barnes and Noble, the manga section's huge, and you see tons of people milling around, pulling off books and reading them and checking them out. And, it's one of the more populated areas of the store. And the two go hand in hand, obviously.
It's probably the only reason we still have Barnes and Noble. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
And they even have tie-in model kits and toys. Like, you can see like Totoro imports for like $300. I mean, they wouldn't carry that stuff if it didn't move.
They've got like little Studio Ghibli like stands in the middle of the store. Like, there's tons of like anime statues and models there. It's almost becoming a weeb store.
Well, I got my son a ton of like Totoro stuff because he loved that movie when he was little, and so I would get him stuff, but it'd be like the bootleg Chinatown knockoffs of all the official Japanese stuff. Because if you we really have a little Saigon. It's actually a little Vietnamese town, but I'd go over there and you'd have all the imports from China, the knockoffs of the Totoro lamp and the water fountain and the piggy bank and the plushie and all that stuff. So it's like, okay, well, so we get to enjoy our weebiness on the cheap here with the Chinese knockoffs, because the Japanese imports are way too overpriced. It's like, nah, I ain't got that type of budget going for me.
No, I remember getting like one Gundam model kit when I was a kid, and it was way too much of my grocery store paycheck. I was like, nah, not doing this.
Right.
But Miyazaki has a quote about the goal of his works that I really like. I think you'll appreciate this. He says he wants his work to, quote, offer a sense of liberation to present day young people who, in this suffocating, overprotective, and managed society, find their path to self-reliant independence blocked and have become neurotic. Wow.
He's right.
I mean, and I'm sure it was way less. I'm sure it was way less suffocating, overprotective, and managed when he said that.
Yes.
The neuroses are off the charts now. But
Oh,
it also, it also kind of sets something off in me because, there's an environmentalist message in his movies, but it is not a Japanese environmentalist message is very different from an American one, because the American environmentalist message promotes the suffocating, overprotective, managed society.
Yes.
The American environmentalist, it's a nanny state. It always starts with, give us more of your money, all of it. Maybe you can drive a vehicle that we can turn off at any time, that is not able to go very far. You will live in small, teeny tiny accommodations, and you will eat a diet that is good for the planet. And it'll all come from some source that makes all the money off of it. But you will be very managed. You will surrender more of your money to this managerial system that will keep you in a small managed area that we will refer to as a community, but does not resemble a community. And you'll have your streaming and your porn and whatever else you want,
Right. Stay in your cubicle, stay in your home, your apartment,
and
stay overpriced, the rent is high.
Yes. And
eat ramen noodles.
You will be as managed and suffocated and protected as possible. But in a Miyazaki film, I think a lot of people see the environmentalist message and go, oh, they'll confuse the two. They'll go, well, that's it must be that type of thing. But I think the Japanese have a more holistic look at environmental stuff. They have their big,
it's more like conservation. It's conservationist. I don't even think it's environmentalist.
Yeah, I think environmentalist is the wrong word, because environmentalism to me is synonymous with revolutionary. It's synonymous with utopian. It's synonymous with violent. And frankly, it's kind of violence in a way. It's coercive.
Yes.
And I would say I think that you're right. The word conservationist is a better term.
Mm-hmm.
for what you see in these movies.
Right. It's like, as an aside, we recently, now in Colorado, just about everywhere, we have a 10-cent fee for every plastic bag used in a store. And I looked into it, something like 6 cents of that goes to the government.
Yes.
4 cents, they can't even tell you where it's going. It's just another way to tax you, get money out of you.
Yeah, they tried that in Dallas, and it was it became like a source of unrest in grocery stores. Like,
I hope it does here, but
there would be dudes like this is Texas, so who knows? But I remember there were guys with like plastic bags covering their bodies that were like, take one, outside. There were people doing like kind of IRL activism over it, and people would be checking out and then be like, I'm sorry, I don't have 10 cents on me. Can you just, it would just become a big, it made checking out.
Do the Chris Rocker thing. Can you break a 5?
Yeah.
Can you break 100?
It made checking out bags. It made checking out take longer. And I think honestly, that was where it became really contentious, was because it made checking out, it made people wait in line longer.
It is really annoying. And the funny thing is I heard when California did it, I went out there for Dragon Fest and to hang out with Lou Fing and other people and meet some cool people. And at that time, they had just installed the 10-cent tax per bag. And the big hot rumor at the time was told to me by a source I trust. He says because homeless people were using them as condoms. So there's everybody waits for me to say something shocking on every show. And I've been slacking the last couple of years because I've been Mr. Nice Guy, but I figure I got to bring back the humor that everybody misses about this show. Hunter's looking at a way to remove this from the video, but this is what I was told.
I'm just grossed out. That's all.
Oh, they use them as condoms.
He needed the money.
Here's our next negative review.
Yeah.
I love an open night at the Catskills. I don't need my movie podcast to be so blue.
I don't need Lenny Bruce on the podcast.
Yeah. Look at Lenny Bruce over here.
Yeah,
saying jaw-dropping offensive stuff.
But so Warriors of the Wind. How do you think this version compares to Nausicaa, the OG?
I'll tell you this: I've only watched them. Well, I watch it once in Japanese. I don't like to watch anime in Japanese with subtitles, even though I'm doing it right now with the first Lupin series, which is on Amazon Freevee.
I'll always go dub.
I like dubbing. I like dubbing.
Me too.
No problem.
It's easier. It's easier to watch.
And also, like, my knowledge of the Japanese language and everything, it's funny when I'm watching something subtitled and the guy they got to dub Lupin, who a character I would assume is like 30 years old, sounds like he's 80. It's like, what? It's like, so Tony Oliveri, I think that's his name, with his Fujiko, that somehow that makes more sense to me.
It matches. Like when I hear him, I go, that's what Lupin sounds like.
Fujiko.
Yeah.
It looks, in English, it suits the character better. Maybe in Japanese, for Japanese speakers, that's more suitable. But the Warriors of the Wind dub is far superior to the Disney dub, because one problem with the Disney dubs, instead of getting just nothing but voice professionals, they get real stars.
They get
like
names,
familiar names, and so when you hear their voice, it's kind of like there's one Porco Rossi, I think that's the name of it, with the pig that like flies planes.
Yeah, Porco Rossi.
Michael Keaton. Yeah, Michael Keaton voices him. And so it's distracting when you hear it because you just think Beetlejuice or Batman or Mr. Mom. And
when I saw that, I wouldn't have known that was Michael Keaton if you hadn't told me.
Really?
The way he plays it is so toned down. Like I just wouldn't have known.
You might not be as orally sensitive to like voices like I am. I'm real sensitive to it. I am.
Maybe
like
not.
I can hear stuff in music. I can tell when something is a re-recording or whatever. It's crazy.
Like there's some of those Disney actors. Sometimes I don't know who it is, but sometimes I do. Like in Nausicaa, the that one character, I'm like, that's Patrick Stewart. boom,
right?
Because he's Patrick Stewart,
That's Timothy Dalton.
Yes, but
You never say that's George Lazenby though.
Yeah,
that's my favorite part.
Yeah, I think I like the voices in Warriors of the Wind. I think the script is a lot more simplified. You don't get as much of that lore and kind of richness. Especially with
it's a Shogun Assassin effect. It's like Shogun Assassin. That's a simplified baby card for people who don't want to learn about Japanese culture, and it works if you're watching it and you don't know the movies.
Yeah, and I think if I watch it, I'm gonna go for the full one. But this one was cool to watch because that's how that's how most people over here were introduced to this movie.
Right.
So I felt like you got a lot less of the giant stuff in there. Like it felt like the giant just sort of, they were like, well, there's the giants. They destroyed the earth one day. Oh, we've got this one in here.
Probably because you have these lingering tracking shot. I mean, in the original version, it's kind of the camera, just meditates on the giant.
Yeah, they spend a lot of time building up these world-destroying giants. So
because it's meant to be seen in a theater, like a dome theater in Tokyo, with like all the 20-year-olds are like, well, in amazement at it. And yet this is made for a market where kids are watching it on 20-inch TVs, so the parents can go drink some vodka or something.
And I just didn't think it hit as hard when that melting nightmare monster comes crawling out, and firing.
The visual impact isn't really there.
But it was a cool way to watch it. And as far as anime import jobs go that alter the source material, it is not at all an egregious example, I don't think. Like,
no,
it doesn't take it simplifies it, but it doesn't take any crazy liberties with it. It doesn't just completely alter it. It's just sort of a simpler version aimed at a younger audience. And I think that's fine. I
see nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's not a crime against humanity.
And it helped. It helped get that stuff over here. It's like kids watching this in the 80s and kids watching Dragon Ball Z, altered or not. I mean, it helps. Every bit helps. I mean, the funny thing is, anime is so mainstream accepted now. I mean, on Pluto TV, you can watch a 24-hour loop in the third channel.
Yeah.
Was that even conceivable 10 years ago? Not even a year ago did I think I'd see something like that.
And think about major Hollywood studios are funding anime. Like Netflix is putting out that, like, I hear that new Cyberpunk anime series on Netflix. I hear it's awesome.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I hear it's really good. One of my friends from high school actually texted me and he goes, "Have you seen Cyberpunk Edge Runners yet?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Watch it." He goes, "It made me feel like I was 17 again watching this stuff." I was like, wow. I was like, that's high praise. I know people.
I remember the early days of Hulu when it was really worth getting. They had a lot of 70s anime from like the original Fist of the North Star anime series, not the movie. The TV series is said to be superior. They had the Masoyama anime TV show, Karate Fist, or I forget what it's called. They had a lot of stuff, and then like almost overnight, Hulu became worthless. Like, suddenly it was just Handmaid's Tale, and you can watch wrestling. It's just nothing. There was no old TV shows, no old like anime, nothing.
Lots of like kind of daytime programming on there, like kind of ABC daytime tier true crime stuff. Not even
it's all for women now. There's nothing for men. There's no gun smoke. There's no Have Gun Will Travel. There's no old westerns, old anime. Nothing. There's nothing like that. There's no kung fu films. It's really weird. It's just worthless.
Yeah. But yeah, I think you're right. I think this version of it did help anime get the foothold here. And I think there's the story about when Princess Mononoke was coming out. Harvey Weinstein got the rights to it, and of course Harvey's going to want to do stuff to it. That's what he does. and
Got to put
Miyazaki,
his creative stamp on it.
yes, Miyazaki mailed him a samurai sword with just a message that said "no cuts," and and he apparently Harvey went okay and just released it. But I think that was at a time when an audience was more willing to watch that movie as it was, just
right. And it was, I saw it at an art house theater in Boston at the Coolidge Corner, and that was the audience. There was no kids there. Kids weren't going to see this thing, and it wasn't marketed to them at all. So it was more of a, hey, we're ready to watch this stuff at the art house theater. And the funny thing is, like last summer, I took my kid to see The Cat Returns for like one of those Fathom event screenings, and then I said, did we watch this on HBO Max like 2 years ago? And Kato was like, yeah, we did. I was like, oh, well, it's cool to see on the big screen. And they are a different experience on the big screen. I do recommend, I mean, gosh, all these theaters have Miyazaki festivals every year where you can see these films revived, for 1 or 2 days.
Well,
and you have a choice between dubbed or subtitled. I go for the dub, but
I was like a freshman in high school when Mononoke came out, and I saw it in the theater. And, I was blown away by it because I was just getting into anime, and seeing that movie on the big screen, it was like, oh my gosh, I had just seen the greatest movie ever,
It might have been the first anime I saw on the big screen. I can't remember. Maybe I saw Akira like at a art house theater, but I think Princess Mononoke was probably the first. Maybe.
But so what would you give the original Nausicaa, and what would you give Warriors of the Wind?
It's not one of my favorites. It is a Dune knockoff. It's not one of the strongest Miyazaki movies. He made way better movies, and this isn't a knock on him. It's just how I feel about it. It doesn't excite me as much as the Lupin film he did, or
it's his second
some
movie,
of his other
too.
stuff like what's the Kiki's Delivery Service. I thought was exceptional. My Neighbor Totoro has grown to be a favorite because my son would watch it.
Totoro's
every month.
That's a 10 out of 10. Totoro.
Yeah, it's great.
Movie,
It's great. And it's funny for me because I was always so anti-anime because I found the fans real obnoxious in the 90s. But, I kind of grew on me because the accessibility to it is so much better. And now that I have a kid that is getting into animation because of this stuff, and Harryhausen and some of our other favorites, I'm more open to it. I enjoy it a lot more. And it's better to see this stuff in high definition instead of like bootleg tapes. And that's that's how I kind of grew.
Oh yeah,
or watching it with no translation. That was common.
I remember getting,
but I would give Nausicaa probably a 7, and I would give Warriors of the Wind is a decent 6. It doesn't offend me. The stuff isn't religion. It's not it's not the Bible. It's not the Torah. It's nothing like that.
Yeah, I'm very close to you. I give Warriors of the Wind a 6. I give Nausicaa an 8. I really enjoy it. It is a Dune knockoff. It's his second movie. It's not his strongest, but I think even a weaker Miyazaki movie is very good.
It's probably more enjoyable than watching either version of Dune. I haven't seen the new one, but
yeah,
the Lynch 100%. The Lynch one's okay. I don't hate it.
Yeah, no, I like the David Lynch one. I own it on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. So that should tell you.
I was thinking it might have been preferable had Frank Herbert just sold the rights to a Japanese, like to Toei, and just given us an anime version. I think that would have worked better.
Yeah, it would have. But now let's switch gears to another New World anime that is totally, I would say, not remotely respectful of the source material, but not in a bad way.
A real step in the puddle here.
Probably, we talked about, Nausicaa was pared down in Warriors of the Wind to be something more simple. When New World got a hold of Angel's Egg in one of these big multi-package deals, Angel's Egg, have you seen Angel's Egg, John?
No, never seen it.
It is not a movie you would watch and go, yeah, this is releasable, especially not in 1988. Like, it would be like dropping, it would be like going to, it would be like going to Japan and dropping in David Lynch's Eraserhead and say, add scenes, like, figure this out. It is
that cuts the scenes of King Ghidorah walking through Tokyo or something.
Yeah, like it is an art house movie that it's a blot test. It is, what's it about? I don't know, religion. Maybe it might have something to do with who knows, you know. It's a very strange movie, but it was directed by Mamoru Oshii, who's famous for Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
And it has artwork. The art direction is by Yoshitaka Amano, who did the artwork for the Final Fantasy video games and for Vampire Hunter D. And
Right.
so it has his very distinct look. But so when it came to New World, Corman gave it to Carl Kulpert, who was then an unknown director, but he went on to produce the Robert E. Howard biopic, The Whole Wide World.
Right.
And he did a lot of the kind of 90s he produced a lot of the 90s Allison Anders films like Mi Vida Loca and Gas Food Lodging and stuff like that. But he directed a bunch of other movies too, but he's still active today. But instead of just going, right, let's pare this down or make sense of it, most anime films, I can't think of another example where they did this. They shot live action footage to intersperse with it. They added voiceover and new dialogue. They completely redid it into they made a completely new movie out of it. If you watch Angel's Egg, it's a totally different movie. The way that movie starts and is paced, it's not like when you watch In the Aftermath and you see the anime sequences, they're not in any sort of order. In fact, even the sequences are heavily altered. Sound effects are taken out and changed. The sequences are made shorter. I think they cut about half of the movie out and put in live action sequences into it. So you can watch this movie on YouTube. Arrow Video did put it out on Blu-ray. So what'd you think of this?
I've only seen the version that's on YouTube.
Yeah.
And oh man, this is bad. I wish I was watching Warriors of the Wasteland or some Italian Road Warrior ripoff or something, because this reminds me of how, like, I used to really hate it when New World Pictures would sometimes get a hold of a Japanese or Asian film in general and slaughter it, you know. So I know they love Godzilla 1985, but as we talked about on our show, I strongly prefer the Japanese version, and they should have just released a straight serious dub of that instead of, you know, shots of Raymond Burr eating up the camera and, you know, eating up the set. Yeah, literally. And grabbing man ass, you know. But like, okay, a lot of people, I will bring up Seven Blows of the Dragon, where Corman got the rights to a Shaw Brothers movie called The Water Margin, which is like absolutely the worst possible pick of the Shaw Brothers library to import over here.
Why would you choose that? Because The Water Margin's like this massive ensemble epic martial arts movie,
and it's a second part of like a trilogy, or it's the first part of a trilogy, and it's a huge cast, and it's all these characters that the Chinese know who they are, but no American's gonna know. They want to see some chopsaki, they want some violence, you know. And it's like, and you pick this film when there were so many other movies Shaw Brothers had at the time that Corman could have picked and gotten a better release out of. It would have been more. I can't figure that guy out. I think he stumbles into things by luck. Really, I don't think he's the genius he's made out to be.
I wonder if he just gets a good deal and he's just looks at it and goes, "Okay, there's some fighting in it. Figure it out." You know, like,
yeah, that's what he did. And they had like a sex scene added to the film, and it was cut to 80 minutes, and it was just an odd pick. And Chris Poggiali believed that it was because there was this actress who was appearing in Shaw Brothers films, and she was also appearing in Hollywood productions. Chinese actress, forget her name right now, but he said that he thinks she talked Corman into picking that because she was familiar with the story, and she could help supervise the dubbing and get an extra gig out of that, and it would be easy for her because she knew the story, and she brought in James Hong and you know, did the Hollywood dub on it. That one is uniquely dubbed in Hollywood, so as opposed to Hong Kong, which is most of the Shaw Brothers films except for like Inframan are dubbed elsewhere. But I think that's what it was. But it was a weird pick, and Corman has a weird history. And the more I read about him, I'm starting to think he lucked into stuff more than being a genius.
No.
Charles Grodin had a very negative experience working with him, and in one of his books, he just trashes him. So absolutely horrible human being to work with. And then a story recently came out. I was in conversation with Richard Juice on Twitter. I do recommend him as a follow. He said that John Carpenter used to go around saying that these young filmmakers that got into a deal with Corman, it was a bad deal. And like apparently he had walked away from a Corman offer because what it was Corman would put up half the money, but then that filmmaker had to come up with the other half for the budget. So like Martin Scorsese probably had to dig up half money from his family to finance Boxcar Bertha, which is, it sounds crazy, but if you think about it, it makes sense because Paul Bartel could not get Corman to finance Eating Raoul. Corman's like, I'll put up half the budget, you come up with the other half. You know, it was just like, and Bartel didn't have the type of money, and he made some of Corman's most successful movies, and that's how he got treated. So he got different financing. It got released independently by another studio, and it's one of the most respected cult movies of the 20th century. And Corman had a chance to put his name on it and money and didn't, you know, just because he's a cheapskate.
So if this business model of his makes more sense now, because, okay, like the narrative is, you know, the studio system was falling apart. There were these new things called film schools. There were these kids coming out of these new film schools who were ready to make money. Corman could hire them for cheap. Well,
right.
If you are going to a film school, you come from a little bit of money where there's something, not that college was not as expensive back then as it is now, but but these were not, you know, just people off the street. Corman might have seen that. Would be interesting. I mean, we'll have to look more into this, but maybe he saw these guys as marks, you know, like, I can put up just a little bit, they put up the rest, I keep the profits, and they get to make their little movie. It's kind of like one of these scammy entry level business things where you're paying to work for me. That would be interesting if he was just, you know, okay, you know, if you're like, you know, I know Peter Bogdanovich wasn't rich, but you know, he was doing stuff for Corman. But you know, Demi or Coppola or whoever, you gotta maybe we gotta look into that. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, okay, like when Bogdanovich was working with Corman, it was in the 60s, and I think they were still working for AIP. And Corman was still getting contracts for major studios, you know, but he would run scams. Like CBS would give him money for Piranha as long as he shot a TV version they could air on the CBS late movie. So he gets $2 million from CBS to or $1 million to finance Piranha. Let's say he pockets $500,000, and then the $500,000 is what Joe Dante has to work with for the movie. That's the type of scam he ran. You know, and Grodin was like, he tried to trick me because I bought an air conditioning system for a studio set. He didn't have air conditioning, and we had kids in there and everything, and you know, and they're sweating, everybody's just burning up in this cheap studio. Corman's trying to move the air conditioning system to another stage, and it was like, oh, thank you for buying us an air conditioning system. You know, he's an absolute scumbag, really. Yeah, he always talks about what a rebel he is, and he's in all left-wing art and all this. He's worth like $90 million.
Yeah.
And the cheap son of a bitch, he gets people to work on his dumb Sharknado movies, or I don't know, Plum Ant versus the Giant Squid, or whatever the hell he does for this crap he does for Sci-Fi Channel that's shot in like a week at some Mexican hotel. He just works out a deal with the hotels that'll call up Eric Roberts and say, I can't pay you, but I can give you and your wife a 1-week vacation at this Mexican resort. You know, it's just weird, scummy stuff. Yeah. It's just strange to me. And God knows how much money he's making off these dumb things, selling them to Sci-Fi.
He's the one who's winning. But it would be interesting to see if it wasn't just a scam to get kids' first movie made out of school.
Right.
But so what did you think of the anime sections in the Aftermath?
Probably have to see it in a better print to appreciate it.
You can watch Angels.
The YouTube print is very faded and stretched and doesn't really look good. So it's hard to say. It's just, you know, it just looked weird. It was probably in a very artsy anime in Japan or whatever. And it's been reduced to like these weird bridging scenes or whatever for these really awkward live action sequences.
which are all shot at the same quarry where they shot Nemesis and Terminator 2.
Yeah, yeah.
It,
It's
which
like
I look,
maybe Albert Pune should have done something with this.
I think they did shoot it there. I think it's the same place.
Right. Well, if Albert Pune had shot it, it would have cut to these bodybuilding men and women with their veins popping out.
Oh
of
yeah, there would have
their
been
biceps and stuff.
the two dudes at the beginning. Which, by the way, I think it's a bad idea to have your main character wear a gas mask for the first portion of the film.
Yeah.
Like the person needs to be a human being.
Yeah, the audience needs to connect. The audience has to connect to it.
And they put stuff in there like the dude attacks him with a harpoon, and the harpoon imagery is in the movie, and try to put these images in there. But if Pune had directed it, they would have been chased around by a model in a mini skirt with a Desert Eagle and sunglasses.
Yeah.
And she would have had like
and
cleavage,
some John Woo
hanging
type
out.
stuff.
Yeah. And
somebody would have done a spin kick on somebody.
Olivier Gruner would show up and punch someone in the face and knock them through a wall.
Yeah, everybody would have been named after guitars and surfers or something. Yeah. Hey, dismiss his movies if you want, but he had a voice.
Yes, he did. Albert Pune is an auteur just as much as Coppola, just as much as anybody else. But yeah, I thought you would get a kick out of this one, even if you didn't like it, just because it's such a weird take on anime, because it tries to make sense out of it by putting in live action, and even like
less sense,
even taking like cutting out the female character and sticking her in like to certain scenes. Like they put her in the live action stuff.
They didn't understand the source material at all. That's basically how I took it.
Yeah, I read the director said he just found it incomprehensible, and so they just tried to string something together out of it. But yeah, like if you've seen this version and think you've seen some version of Angel's Egg, you really haven't. Like the final shot of like the bird in the egg, and it starts to stir and wake up, and that's like the end. That's like at the beginning of the movie. They're like, just to give you an idea, like when the giant sphere lands and with all those statues on it, and you hear this deafening like tea kettle going off noise as steam comes out of it in the original one, and that's totally gone. But the girl's like, my brother, blah 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 blah. He's an angel like me. There's none of that in Angel's Egg.
Yeah.
But Angel's Egg is pretty short. It's about the same running time as this movie.
They should have just done a straight dub and then tried to get it on the art circuit somehow.
Yeah, they should have.
If Corman or the New World people were as innovative as they claim they've been in histories.
Yeah, I think what they should have done was tried to see if they could get the midnight movie crowd, because movies like El Topo
go for the ultimate trip.
Yeah.
Just encourage the stoners like Heavy Metal would do. Like they would revive that Heavy Metal cartoon movie all the time at midnight movies.
Yeah, I think this thing would have played well to the crowd that likes El Topo, Eraserhead, stuff like that, because they're very much that kind of movie. It's very abstract, very lyrical, strange, scary. It runs the gamut. It's mysterious.
Right.
I think it had a big influence on video games too. I know the art director directs the art of or not directs the art, but is the artist behind one of the biggest RPG franchises. But if you look at games like Elden Ring, they have or Bloodborne, which is from the same studio, they have a very similar aesthetic. There's this similar kind of massiveness, mysteriousness, emptiness to a world that I think is interesting. And I think it comes through in the Aftermath. But what's funny is Angel's Egg's never really gotten a release over here. In the Aftermath is the only like thing that's the only like, even on Blu-ray, it's the only real way it's available. If you want to watch Angel's Egg, you have to go on YouTube.
Yeah, I looked it up, and according to like one entry I read, probably Wikipedia, they said that Anchor Bay had announced an Angel's Egg DVD, but there seems to be a rights problem because of this New World bastardization, because it screwed up the domestic video rights. And I know a similar problem happened with Godzilla 1985, which they altered. That's been a high Blu-ray release demand film. Nothing's happened, and it didn't even get a DVD release. Yeah. So like everybody's piecing together old VHS tapes and throwing those up on YouTube, but that's it.
Yeah, no, that would make total sense. That's the reason we haven't got, because I think Arrow would have put out Angel's Egg if they could, or something like that with it,
Yeah.
But again, there seems to be sort of a fondness for these New World kind of versions, because Arrow put out a Blu-ray of it, and there's a video essay where a guy talks in depth about this very specific era of anime coming out over here.
Right. Well, it's our first experience with the genre, I think, in many cases, just because it was available at a video store. And like in my case, the first samurai film I saw was Shogun Assassin.
Yeah.
Just because it was on Cinemax in 1982, and I saw it at a way too young age, and it made an impression. So I was visually ready to start watching samurai movies.
Widely available, that was always easy to find. Shogun Assassin, you would have seen that before Seven Samurai or Yojimbo.
Yes, it was in every video store because it was very popular with the flea pit crowd, the B movie crowd, the violence movie crowd, and it had a near 4-star rating in Leonard Maltin's TV movies. That helped too back then,
Well, is there anything else you wanted to add about In the Aftermath? Any thoughts or opinions?
Thank God we don't do this stuff anymore. This slaughtering of a work like that. Like, even lousy half-assed German films get more respectful releases these days. Even the Bollywood films now play local theaters uncut and complete. And not a cinema I particularly care for, but it is interesting to see how pretty much all foreign product gets way more respect these days. It's more. Like they don't assume people are stupid and closed-minded anymore. That's good to see, and it may have a lot to do with the recent. You'll notice there's been an explosion lately in releases of my old Hong Kong favorites, and from Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest, and that stuff is selling really well, is my understanding. And it's just like, I think the home video viewers, the people who watch the flicks and stuff, it's like they're not getting something out of what's in theaters, and they now have access to all this stuff in the purest, most uncut form, and that's a good thing. Nothing wrong with it.
Pure uncut cinema. Pure uncut.
Yeah,
cinema.
Like Netflix, straight ahead. You can get the latest Bollywood thing, Korea. God, it's tons of Korean stuff. I mean, you could call it Korean flicks, and it wouldn't be a bad description for Netflix. Yeah. There's so much. Which, by the way, I don't particularly care for it. I'm not a big fan of Korean cinema, at least not yet. I like old Dragon Lee movies or movies starring my friend Bobby Kim. I don't. Most of the recent stuff hasn't really moved me.
Well, what would you give In the Aftermath?
Oh God, 1. Are you kidding me? Come on. This was painful to sit through, and I don't think it's just because it's a stretched version on YouTube. I can imagine my son sitting through this thing. Good Lord. Could you imagine the people who rented this thing and were just like, the hell did I rent my kid? It's just like,
what is this? What is this? No, here's the thing.
It's a Pink Floyd album cover come to life. That's all it is.
I would give it a 5, and the only reason I rate it a little higher is because I wanted to see Angel's Egg for so long, wanted to see it so bad, and this was the way I was able to watch it. And so for a while I was like, oh, okay, so I've got my Angels. I got to see some of it, and but when I finally watched Angel's Egg, I was like, holy crap, they just totally got.
Or you're just trying to be the nicest reviewer on this show. You always give the most generous ratings.
Yeah, I know.
Like, I think you rated Losing It twice what it was really worth. It was just like,
oh yeah,
or maybe 3 times. It's like, but you're like the nicest reviewer ever.
I didn't want to hurt Stu's feelings. He seemed very personally invested in that one, so I wanted to make him happy. Yeah, or I didn't want to make him too upset.
He identified with Joe Spinell's character. That's what it was.
All right. Well, you got anything to plug, John?
No, nothing to plug this week. Hopefully, I have some fun announcements to make in the next few months. So I'm always working on stuff, and 9 times out of 10, the stuff ain't working out. But continue to try working on stuff. So
Yeah.
don't be a bug man and just like consume. Try to work on stuff. That's my encouragement to everybody.
And
don't let the man get you down, kids. Okay.
And I've got a few appearances that might be coming down the pipe, so I'll keep y'all posted on those. But should be cool if they pan out. But in the meantime, go get that Death Wish with Paul Talbot.
Yes,
this was I was like, I got to get that one right when it comes out. Get that slip cover, with the reversible, all that, So anyway, well, if there's nothing else, John, I'm going to go ahead and say adios.
Yeah, peace out.
And now, it's time for Rue Britannia with your foreign correspondent, the Nez.
In a move that will surprise nobody ever knows who still believe and maintain that Joe Biden isn't on fentanyl, ex-Prime Minister Boris Johnson this week got into even more of a pickle when it transpired, courtesy of the Sunday Times, that he had effectively received an £82,000 loan from the chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp. Funny indeed how it is that even after leaving office, people are still queuing up to provide Boris Johnson with loans. Naturally, Captain Underpants, as usual, still struggling for money and convincingly denied the allegations. Quote unquote, I've never told a lie in 12 months, squawked the blonde bombshell. I never took a single penny. Ask the Ukrainians. I told them last year that the war would actually be over by January this year. Famous lost words. Now that his comeback tour has hit a buffer, it's now formally left to the Sunday Times to follow the story up and formally finish with just what little is actually left of his intended ambitions for a return. More bore than jaw. Comedy, and one of England's most prolific serial killers smashed his way into the record books this week by setting the domestic record for being housed in solitary confinement. 69-year-old serial killer Robert Morsley, having been convicted of killing child abuser John Farrell in 1974, made penal history by being housed home alone for over 16,400 days. Putting it mildly, Charles Bronson, or whatever on earth he's actually calling himself this week, doesn't even get close. Morsley, who spent 44 years in the glass partition cell for killing other serial killers behind bars, celebrated the malice of the mind, demanding that the prison governor allows him access to a chess set and steel cutlery and ceramic crockery. The prison governor politely declined. Quote unquote, I don't know why they all hate me, said the convicted brain-eating loon. I keep asking for canary for my cell. Why can't they actually feel sorry for me after all? He chirped. For the record, these self-pitists will never be eligible for parole. Ever. Which is good news for Bobby in that he now automatically qualifies for his own reality TV show on ITV on a Saturday evening. Nice guy. Kills people. Culture. And a 19-year-old Muslim convert jihadi was convicted this week of practicing his religious obligation, namely threatening to cut people's heads off online. Not so much love and peace, but love and pieces. Matthew King, professional goat abuser, was also convicted of spying on police stations, spying on railway stations, spying on a magistrate's court, as well as also an army barracks. Hatred to no one indeed, evidently. Anyway, if convicted, King could spend up to 20 years in prison, which by extension means he'll be spending time in the prison showers with Big Bad Barry. Alan's cockbar, I suppose. Meanwhile, in more multicultural shenanigans, another Muslim terrorist suspect was arrested this week after a bomb was found at St James's Hospital in Leeds. Now, the hospital wasn't named after Jimmy Savile, although on the other hand, he did actually do an awful lot of his dating there. Anyway, the usual protocol applied. Patients evacuated, bomb squad called in, name of suspect withheld. In short, the BBC are just missing another viewer. Further notes in passing, this season's run of Love Island was plunged into more crisis when one of the contestants was caught using cocaine on camera. Personally, it's not the contestants that actually need the cocaine, it's the viewers. Jacob Rees-Mogg gets his own show on GB News. It's called How I Had the Indignity of Meeting a Member of the Working Class. And finally, the Scottish government backs down over its decision to send a convicted transgender male rapist to a woman's prison, and instead decides to send him to a male prison regardless. Evidently, the Scottish Justice Minister actually had fewer balls than the convicted rapist himself. Pax.